do in a more normal environment. So I'll definitely be scanning the chat, ask the authors to, if they can, whether presenting later. Certainly for the people asking questions, if you point your questions to specific people, that's really helps it quite a bit. So YouTube is now live. I do have a beep when people have done their, when, irritates me too, when 2 minutes left in the talks, that's worked out pretty well. And I think that's just about it. So why don't we get started here with the first session. I should mention what the session's about. Small changes with a potentially big impact for people to teach big courses, any courses at all. Making changes kind of tough sometimes, and these small changes are particularly appealing. The first talk then is targeting students at risk using a standard math skills assessment, and George Orloff Cornell would make that presentation. So all yours, George.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Let me just share the screen. And can everybody hear and see me okay? Okay. All right. Thank you so much for being here via Zoom and YouTube. This is joint work with Daria Botan, Douglas McKee, Stephanie Thomas, and Jennifer Wissing at Cornell University, and Irene Forster at George Washington University. And so let's talk about math skills, because they're critical for success in economics courses. If you think about our introductory courses, they require students to have a good grasp of basic arithmetic, algebra, also be able to work with graphs. And if you think about intermediate courses, we also throw in calculus in the mix, whether you're looking at macro or micro. On the kind of side of the instructor, however, we actually often don't have the accurate picture of what our students' math skill distribution looks like when they come into our class, where the holes in the knowledge are. At the same time, probably the students are also not as aware where they may have some shortcomings. So sort of curse of knowledge on both sides. And if we had an accurate picture of our students' math skills, let's say we have a means to do so, what could we do with it? And actually, why should we be doing this? General idea is actually, if you think about it, that when students lack these math skills, they're probably not as successful in our courses. They're probably dropping out. They're potentially not achieving what they could otherwise with some extra math training. And the other part, kind of tying it to the last session, is students who also get hit in this situation. If you look at statistics, minority students and potentially first-generation students, because there's some uneven level of preparation comparatively. If you look at the top quartile of the distribution in the class versus the lowest quartile. So what could we do with it? So Irene Forster actually has been using an in-house math assessment at George Washington University to direct students into a course aimed at developing their math skills to a level where they can actually succeed in introductory economics and maybe proceed further on. Also thinking of kind of getting a big picture, in 2018, Doug McKee and I at Cornell developed a mathematics assessment for the intermediate microeconomics course. So thinking about calculus, algebra, graphs in that context. So it was very logical then we met in 2019 at C3. We actually talked and joined forces to develop 2 new multiple choice assessments, which can be administered as low stakes assessments. And we call them MESA Foundations, so which covers arithmetic, graphs, and algebra. As you can guess, this is very applicable for introductory courses. And MESA Intermediate, which is aimed at algebra, graphs, and sort of calculus. Meaning we have integration, multivariate calculus, etc. And MESA stands for Mathematics for Economics Skills Assessment. And these assessments, when we were developing them, we were following the rigorous procedures described in the paper by Wendy Adams and Carl Wyman. So this means that we go from learning goals to building questions. We include faculty feedback from our institutions and outside of our institutions, and we actually conduct think aloud interviews with students to kind of figure out what their misconceptions are and where they go wrong. What do these assessments look like when we take it to data, to take it into the classroom? So this is data from Cornell for the introductory course of introductory microeconomics and intermediate microeconomics. So the MESA Foundations, if you look at this, it has 28 multiple choice questions. 7 of them are on foundational arithmetic. So think of unit conversions, percentages, translating word problems into mathematics. 9 are on reading and using graphs, anywhere from solving equations using math to inequalities, looking through calculating areas of regions on a graph. And 12 questions are on algebra. And this is something which is really important if you think of your supply-demand models. We can think of solving equations, systems of equations, and working with functions in general. Then we updated, sort of moving on to the next level, to the MESA Intermediate, we added questions on calculus. So there's 11 questions on derivatives and basic integration. But at the same time, we removed the arithmetic questions. And the data you're seeing here, we for the talk and for what we're doing, really served for Cornell as training data, if you will. We use this to determine the best methods for identifying students, which we would call students at risk. And from that perspective, I mean, we are looking at sort of different categories what could be considered at risk. So why is this important? Why this thing, kind of what might happen? In a typical class, you do not know who the students in trouble are until your first midterm exam. And it might be too late for providing effective support. But if you do administer an assessment as a low stakes, no stress assessment for the students at the start of a semester, we as instructors have two sort of generally categories of opportunities. First one is identifying students with a higher likelihood of failing, dropping out, or underperforming due to lacking math skills. And we can conduct some form of intervention, and we'll offer some ideas at the end of this presentation. We also can identify and address class-wide misconceptions as a part of the start of a term math review or TA sessions, whichever way you want to handle this. But this is kind of because the assessment is tied to learning goals. You can see, oh, people are having trouble with, for example, integration. We can do a little bit of review on that. Or maybe people are having trouble with the chain rule. We can do a review on that. So for what follows, as I said, the data which comes from classes for Cornell, and there are 2 sections of introductory microeconomics, which were taught in fall of 2019, 2 terms of intermediate microeconomics, it's spring 2019 and fall 2019. We observe MESA scores appropriate for the class, so the foundations for introductory course and the intermediate for the intermediate course. We gender, underrepresented minority status, and so we generally think about, in sort of our context, the underrepresented minority stands for Black, Hispanic students, also Native students for American backgrounds. Sort of a year in college, course letter grades, and first-generation student status and self-reported GPA for intermediate microeconomics. We are currently piloting MESA Foundations and MESA Intermediate at external sites. And if you're interested in participating in our pilot or just using the assessments, you can contact us at econ-assessments@cornell.edu. So what's the goal of what we are doing? First, we identify half of the students who will actually underperform. Keep in mind, this is a fairly arbitrary statement, right? The half part. It really depends on the resources and who you want to treat, right? You can think if you have resources to treat all the students who would actually, or say 3/4 of students who actually underperform, you will be looking at that. But it's counterbalanced by the second goal. Because again, we have limited resources, we want to minimize the number of false positives. And I'll clarify what I mean by that. So what I'll be focusing in the next few slides is that sort of what I would call a low grade. It's a letter grade in the lowest quartile. And in this courses at Cornell, that would be B- and lower. It would be different for your institution potentially. And then what the 2 statistics we're looking at is the TPR, the true positive rate. So we're looking at a fraction of students who will receive a low grade and score below the threshold, and false positive rate. So fraction of students who do not receive a low grade but score below the threshold. And so we are offering a few ways to try to identify the students who fall in this category based on from assessments or based on a more sophisticated model. So if we look at simple thresholds, the grade in the lowest quartile, and this is just administer MESA, look at the results and say, all right, we will have the blue line representing the true positive rate and the red line representing the false positive rate. And then we can say, well, figure out a threshold, for example, for introductory course at 72, at which we'll have close to half of our actual students who are actually underperforming, with a false rate of, in this case, approximately 20%. It's better for intermediate micro for this threshold purpose. Of course, we don't need to stop at simple thresholds, right? We can actually run a probit model, including more of these variables. Interestingly enough, the probits in this case don't perform much better. The graphs change direction. We're now looking at predicted probabilities, and we're figuring out what would be your predicted probability of receiving a low grade, and we go work with thresholds from there. We went even further because we actually tried, and we are working with some of statistical learning models, think about lasso models, etc. And at the moment, the ones we looked at have very similar results to what we have seen. But it will be different. It potentially will be different for your class. What do you do when you actually have this data? So there are multiple options of what can you do once you know who the students at risk are. You can start very kind of from low to high level interventions. So you can direct identified students to self-directed review. So you know which learning goals they performed poorly on, and you can actually have a more customized review using online systems. Depending on the class size, you of course can have set up appointments of TAs or the course instructor. But that would depend in a 500 people class that might be problematic. And then there's the sort of more, I'd say, intense route. So you can develop or have, if your institution has a supplemental course that teaches both foundational mathematics for economics and study skills, you can advise the students at risk you've identified via email, for example, to enroll in this course with optional enrollment. And this is the Cornell route. On the other hand, as I mentioned, Irene's work, you can develop a principles of mathematics for economic course like George Washington University did, and you strongly recommend the students to take course before they enroll in introductory economics course. And obviously, Irene would probably be able to tell you much more about this. And so, first of all, thank you for your attention. I know it's a little bit very information-packed. I appreciate you bearing with me. And if you have any questions or are interested in piloting our assessments, and this doesn't just relate to mathematics, you can contact us at econ-assessments@cornell.edu, and you can learn more about assessments and what we do at Cornell at the Active Learning Initiative, including this MESA assessment for mathematics for economic skills assessment at the following address. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George. Very interesting. I especially like the part you're looking for partners, people to test this assessment, where it'd be interesting to see different distributions at other places. Next up, we have micro commitments, the effects of small commitments on academic performance, said in other authors as well. And Amanda will be giving this talk.
Okay. All right. So, thank you all for joining today. I'm excited to share with you a project that my co-authors and I started about a year ago. So project co-authors are Ava Daizula from the University of Notre Dame. She's also going to be helping me present, Eric Chang from Florida Atlantic University, and Jose Vasquez from the University of Illinois. And our goal with the project was to think about maybe a new way that we could enhance student success. So we took some things that we know from behavioral economics and academic achievement literature and looked at how social accountability, commitment devices might be able to mitigate procrastination. And our hypothesis was that this technology we had that would deliver this to students, small commitment devices with social accountability, might be able to increase their academic performance. And one of the pathways might be through mitigating procrastination. So as economists, we looked at conceived of the student success as a production function. There's some inputs, and over the course of a semester, we end up with performance levels of the students. And we also know that with respect to any particular input, we're going to have diminishing marginal returns. So our first few lectures mean a lot, but then adding the 30th or the 35th lecture might even have a negative effect. right? So we're looking at finding a new type of input that we could add to what the course components people generally have that might actually sort of take us to a new frontier. So now we look at it like this, where we have a diminishing returns with respect to lectures. Then you add projects and homework, it takes you to a higher level. And then finally, what we're testing today is this micro commitment that we might be able to provide for students in order to keep them from procrastinating and enhance success. So like I said, we primarily drew a lot from the behavioral economics literature, and behavioral economics tells us that we have time and consistent preferences. It basically means that what we intend to do isn't always what happens. So we do pleasurable things too early, and we tend to procrastinate onerous tasks. Well, in the realm of student success, this means students study too little too late. So you can think about a student who might have an exam on a Monday, and they're going to study Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Well, they get to Friday, and they decide that Saturday and Sunday will be enough. They might even make the same decision on Saturday to put off their studying till Sunday. So time and consistency can really have ramifications in terms of student success. And there was an interesting study done by Dan Arley and a co-author where they offered students in a course the option to have deadlines spread out throughout the semester evenly, or everything in the course could be due at the end of the semester. Well, as economists, the rational decision, right, is to keep our budget set the biggest and to have everything due at the end of the semester, which would mean we would have the most options possible. Well, what they found actually was the majority of students wanted the evenly spread out deadlines, and those students who chose that did better. So not only is mitigating procrastination enhancing student performance, but actually students knew about their time and consistency and wanted to mitigate it. And there's a lot of literature, I'm not going to belabor, but there's a lot of literature that shows how commitment devices can mitigate time and consistency.
Sport betting result about COVID.
I saw one from like 3 weeks ago. It was like 100 cases.
Right, 640 new recruits, right?
There's
4 tested positive entering.
social accountability enhances the
I think
effective.
someone does need to mute their mic.
Finally, there is a study or a few studies done where nudging students doesn't actually show an increase in academic performance. So actually just nudging them doesn't necessarily affect that. So we're adding this element of micro commitments.
So we use the ProHabits platform to deliver daily nudges that takes the students to the action description and asks them to make a commitment to completing it that day. They can see their own personal benchmarks as well as their commitments of others in the course, and they will also receive an afternoon check-in text to see if they've actually completed their commitment and the task assigned for the day. The actions are focused on applying the theoretical material from the class to students' everyday experiences and really letting them connect. So at the beginning of the semester, students consented to participating in the experiment and filled out an extensive demographic questionnaire. After the first midterm, the actions were delivered to all participating students. Based on the existing research by Phil Oriopoulos from University of Toronto, showing that the text message nudges really on their own do not impact students' performance, and also with an eye on our IRB clearance from the university that you can't give some students extra resources that could help their academic performance, we decided against using a complete no treatment control group. And our treatment group receives the text nudges using the ProHabits platform with the micro commitments. And the control group is receiving the same text nudge, just as a simple text messages without the option to commit to doing that task for the day. So we observed their initial exam scores, the exam score after the intervention, as well as their final exam score. We had over 700 students participating in face-to-face meetings and instruction at the University of Notre Dame, over 4 different instructors. We had almost 300 students taking an online class at Florida Atlantic and close to 150 in a hybrid course at the University of Illinois.
And our empirical specification was to measure the effect on performance. So we're looking at the exam scores. Then our variable of interest is whether or not they were in our treatment group and had micro commitments rather than just text nudges. We controlled for prior academic performance, demographic and socioeconomic characteristics, and also the instructor in the course. Then we looked at this by course type to see if it varied across different modalities. We looked at this for different performance levels for students, their procrastination type, and then according to their self-efficacy. So our dependent variables were the exam score after the experiment happened. So that would be in percentage points. And then we also looked at it in relative terms, or relative to the mean as a proportion of the class mean. And here are a few of our explanatory variables. You can see we include the exam at the beginning of the experiment. Also, if they've had economics before, if it's a required course. And like I said, there are more explanatory variables. This is what we found. Overall, students who received the commitment device rather than simply the nudge performed 1.33 percentage points higher, or points higher, on their next exam, the exam after the experiment. But what's interesting is that all of the effect was in the online and hybrid courses. So there was an insignificant effect of the micro commitments on the face-to-face courses, which makes, maybe this is, a partial substitute for the social accountability that goes along with face-to-face courses. Then we looked at our results by procrastination type, and there was a larger positive effect of the micro commitments for people who procrastinated relatively more. Also, in terms of self-efficacy, those with a higher self-efficacy level also had a higher benefit, and then lower self-efficacy had an insignificant effect when they had the micro commitments.
So we show that based on our results, the micro commitments may actually be an effective substitutes for the in-class reminders students receive in face-to-face classes, that they might effectively mitigate procrastination and the loss of learning when switching to distant learning, which is especially relevant in today's COVID-19 environment. We are planning extensions to this research in the fall semester, and really incorporate this in more of a game-like setting, focusing on the motivation of students and how their position on the leaderboard impacts their motivation and commitments to completing the assigned actions. We also plan to pay special attention to gender of the students, as well as gender of those who are on the leaderboard that the students can actually observe. So thanks, guys.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Very interesting work. I can see that being applied to my own courses coming up in the fall, whatever modality we might be using. Next up, another paper at least deals with nudges. Rebecca will be presenting, Can a Nudge Improve Student Performance? A replication of the online coaching barriers to success intervention. Rebecca?
Thank you, Bill. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start my own timer too. Hi, everyone. So as Bill mentioned, today I'll be presenting Can a Nudge Improve Student Performance? It's a replication of an online coach barriers to success intervention. So I'm currently on the staff at the Center for Economic Education and Entrepreneurship at the University of Delaware. This work was done at my previous institution, Michigan State University, with two of my colleagues there, Stephen Hyder and Scott Imberman. Oops. So a little bit of background here. We at Michigan State were having the discussion about how we improve student success. And this is a conversation that many of you are probably also having at your institutions. And specifically within the economics department, we were concerned about improving student success in the introductory economics courses. We were concerned about multiple different groups of students performing well and attracting particular majors. At the same time, we were trying to look for some small low-cost nudge or intervention to try and maybe push student success and improvements there. And then we had what I call a fortuitous visit. So we had a visit from Phil Oriopoulos at the University of Toronto. He gave a seminar on this paper, The Remarkable Unresponsiveness of College Students to Nudging and What We Can Learn from It. And in conversations with Phil, we realized that he was doing a lot of really interesting things at Toronto that we could try and replicate at Michigan State. Also give him some more data points to see if what he found in this paper could be applied to other institutions. So in the broader context of our research question, we're trying to determine, as many other authors in this session are, can a nudge improve student performance? More specifically, what we try to look at is, can encouraging emails and text messages improve student performance, particularly when looking at students' identified barriers to success? So what is preventing students in their own mind from being successful in not only economics courses, but in college overall? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the literature review. Basically, just to sum this up, we see that in college courses, there's a lack of student effort and study time. There have been many interventions to try and change student behavior through trying to help them set goals, try and increase study time, better time management. And all of these things have been identified by research and students as potential barriers to their success. There have been mixed results of different small behavioral nudges in college classrooms. And so we wanted to see, would our intervention move the needle at Michigan State? So the intervention we chose was called Barriers to Success. This is also called, in Phil's paper, Online Coaching Only. We changed the name slightly at Michigan State just for our own kind of purposes, as well as we changed one or two of the questions, but there is very minor change from the Online Coaching Only. And what the Barriers to Success intervention looked at is it had students look at what were their future goals and then barriers they may face to achieving those goals. This was administered through something we call Student Achievement Lab. And Student Achievement Lab looks something like this. What you see on the right-hand side here is different interventions that Phil and his team at the University of Toronto have tried over the years at University of Toronto and also multiple other institutions. So this was already set up in an online platform that we could push to students. So what we see is we took the Barriers to Success one, which is actually all the way at the bottom and couldn't quite get it in a screenshot here. And we administered this intervention to 3 sections of Principles of Microeconomics and Principles of Macroeconomics in spring 2019. There were 2 sections of micro and 1 section of macro. So we started the intervention with a warm-up survey. So to incentivize students to participate, this was worth 1% of their overall course grade. It was a minimal amount, and it was just based on whether or not they completed the warm-up survey. The warm-up survey included first a series of background questions about themselves. And then after they completed the background questions, there was random assignment of the students to the treatment, which was the intervention, or to a control group. If students were assigned to the treatment, they received something like this, where it was a kind of a lengthy exercise. You'll see here the exercise took about 45 to 90 minutes. And in this, students were asked to think about their own education and their future in part 1. And then in part 2, they were asked to tell us why they think other students struggle and suggest ways your peers may overcome challenges. The reason we had them talk about their peers rather than themselves was we wanted them to kind of take it outside of themselves and not necessarily have an ego view of this. And we found that, and Phil and other people in the past found that this was a better approach here. So it was a lengthy exercise. And I'm just going to show you the first kind of screenshot they saw. So what you see here is part 1, how to succeed. So we tell them things like, okay, here are 6 tips for general success in a university. The first one being study enough. So in all of the different kind of things here, we had a little prompt for them and said, here's why studying is important. Here's why studying effectively is important. Then we asked students to either think and write about the prompt, as we had them do here, for about 3 to 7 minutes and then move on. Or we had them do a series of Likert items. Do they agree, disagree? For some of the time management aspects, we had them maybe organize what they thought would be appropriate with time. It depended on the individual question. The control group was given a personality assessment. And so the beginning page they saw was here. The personality assessment results were then emailed to the student afterwards in case they wanted to know how they did on the personality assessment. The treatment group also received text messages on Mondays and Fridays, and these text messages provided generic study tips and generic check-ins with the student. The text messages were preset at the beginning of the semester based on what they had identified as barriers to success in the initial warm-up survey. They also received emails on Sundays. These emails were course specific with the due dates and announcements. The control group also received these same emails with course specific due dates and announcements. They just did not receive the text messages that the treatment group received. At the end of the semester, all students were administered a follow-up survey, again, worth 1% of their grade to incentivize them to complete this. This was given to both the treatment and control group, though the treatment group saw some slightly different questions at the end than the control group did. So this is what the screenshot of the follow-up survey looked like. It was a very brief survey that students just had to complete in the last week of classes. It asked about their general well-being, some questions about their study time, their academic performance, and then they had to evaluate the intervention. And the evaluating the intervention was only given to the students in the treatment group. So we gave this to just under 1,400 students in 2 sections of Principles of Micro and 1 section of Principles of Macro in spring 2019. 1,227 students completed the initial survey. We then linked this data with administrative data, and 1,212 students out of those received a grade in the course. 990 students completed the follow-up survey. So we had a little bit of loss there. As I mentioned, we linked the intervention data with administrative data from Michigan State University, and we specifically looked at background characteristics as well as their grade in the course. So what you see here are some of our results. Panel A up here in this table examines whether background characteristics were different between the 2 groups. You'll see here that there are no statistically or significant differences here. So the numbers in parentheses are the standard errors, not the statistical significance. You'll see here that it was pretty balanced in terms of females and in terms of domestic and international students. We chose that because that was something that we wanted to look at in terms of student success at Michigan State. What you see here on the bottom with the female and domestic with the 2 asterisks next to it, that is just for the 999 students who completed the exit or the follow-up survey. That was the restricted sample. When we take a look at the outcomes, we see here, and what we were able to see is that the grades differences between the treatment and the control group were not, the difference here was not statistically significant. We also see the same thing with the positive experience. No, the treatment group versus the control group, the difference there is not statistically significant. The interesting thing we did find was that the control group reported studying more during the semester than the control group reported studying more than the treatment group did. And this was statistically significant, which was a little puzzling to us, but an interesting result nonetheless. We also wanted to take it and see how the treatment students particularly rated the program. And what we see here is that while more students rated the program favorably, so about 42% of students agreed the program was helpful, 40% disagreed, there were more strong negative views than positive ones. So that was interesting too. So what did we find? We found that the intervention had at most minor positive effects on achievement and attitude, similar to Phil's paper. So we kind of went back to the drawing board here and decided this is not something that we wanted to implement in all of our courses. Briefly, we're hoping to figure out a way to kind of nudge students in the right direction, as I'm sure many of us are in terms of their success. I want to thank my MSU colleagues, Stephen and Scott. Thank you to Phil Oriopoulos at the University of Toronto. I want to thank Andrea, who was my graduate research assistant, and then James, who helped with the online platform. If you have any questions, you can send me an email. This is my email. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. Really enjoyed that. Again, as you mentioned, we're all struggling a bit to nudge, or maybe not the right term, our students to do better. Our follow-up paper today is by Dunley. She'll be talking about lecture attendance, lecture capture, and academic performance, evidence from a first-year economics course.
Okay, let me share my screen. Seems there's no response when I try to share. So it shows one participant can share at a time.
Let's see, is someone else sharing a screen at the moment? I am not.
Is the previous speaker still sharing?
Is the previous one stop or not?
Yes, I stopped.
It's very strange.
Still getting the same error message, Dunley.
Could anyone try to share the screen to see if it's working?
Yeah, let me do that.
So, okay, you could.
Yes.
Then why I cannot? Actually, I experimented a few times, no problem at all.
Yes, Murphy does have a way of visiting technology. Let's see here. I wonder if you left the Zoom session and came back in, if that would be effective. Maddie, any thoughts there?
Okay, let me leave and then re-enter.
Or you could
Yeah, let
email
me.
your slides to me would be another option. Well, I think we're doing that.
Is this yours? Let me leave and then re-enter.
Okay. Well, she's working on that. A couple quick thoughts from the last session. One on cell phones. I actually do get my cell phone number of my students. I get very few text or messages. I think it's a nice signaling device. I had 1,700 students last year and maybe one text a week. And I see comments how students appreciate that. Again, I think it's a way to signal interest in their success. I do describe, please don't use it as a primary source. I think last year I had all one person contacting me on, could you please help me with the homework on the text, and said no. While Dunley is coming back in, let me see if we can take a look at a couple of the questions. One for George. One talked a bit about transfer, I think, where students could do well, say, on the first level of math, but then they didn't do well in the course. Any thoughts on that, George?
So in which sense? So there's some, so that's a false positive rate, right? So people do not do well on the math assessment. But at the same time, they might be able to do relatively well in the course. The sort of these are the students we can't affect, right? We can't identify them ahead of time. It's much more problematic than identifying the ones which would have trouble. If I'm understanding the question correctly. At the same time, so once you sort of, Bill, can you clarify? Because like, so I'm
Sure,
like, yes,
where students could do well in a math course,
yes,
but then they actually did not perform well on the assessment, where they can't perform well.
Oh, well, in a
in the
math
math
course.
and economics course. Oh, here we go. I think, why don't we go to Dunley here?
Bill, could I
Yeah.
jump
Go
in
back
on
to
that
your
answer? I'll come back to it afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Irene.
Okay, can everyone see my screen now? Sorry about the inconvenience.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Let me see the. Okay, hello everyone. Let me try to do that from the beginning. Yeah. So my name is Dunley Lee. I'm from UCL. I'm also a member of CTEL. And today I'm going to present my work on lecture attendance, lecture capture, and academic performance with evidence from the first year economics course. There has been a vast literature on the relationship between lecture attendance, mostly measured by physical attendance, lecture capture, and student academic performance. And then the evidence has been mixed. In the post-COVID-19 world, so there has been a wide discussion on the format of online teaching, whether synchronous or asynchronous. If synchronous, a few questions arise naturally. How important is the virtual attendance? As some students might not be able to attend a live session due to the different time zones or due to this internet access problem. What is the importance of online interaction? What is the effect of lecture recording on the virtual attendance? Note that in this presentation, I use lecture recording and the lecture capture interchangeably. So having this in mind, in this study, I address the following questions. First, what is the impact of lecture capture on attendance? Second, how does lecture attendance affect academic performance? Finally, what is the role of in-class participation? Using a 30-year economics course data, our preliminary results suggest that lecture recording indeed has a negative effect on attendance, and passive attendance does not really help to improve academic performance, and in-class participation conditional on attendance is essential. Then what's the implication of this finding for post-COVID-19 online teaching? So it seems that if online teaching is delivered synchronously, the online interaction in class conditional on attendance is the key. So now let's spend a few minutes to discuss our empirical analysis leading to these results. The data, we got the data from the 30-year undergraduate economics module. Is a big class with 368 students. Most of them are economic students and some of them are from the other department. In terms of course delivery, so the students, they come to lecture and interacted with the lectures via this ECHO 360 platform. And how to measure class attendance given such a huge class size? So here we measure class attendance by whether the student entered the online classroom during class time. Remember that the students, they interact with the lectures by this ECHO 360 platform. So essentially, this attendance actually is measured the virtual attendance. In terms of the in-class participation, here that it is measured by the percentage of the poll questions responded by students via this ECHO 360 platform. So this, again, essentially is online in-class participation. We use 3 sets of these regressions to try to answer our research questions. So you can see that these parameters highlighted in red are the one we're particularly interested. Due to time constraint, I will not go over them in detail. As for the variables and the measurement, here, one of our key variable is this lecture capture. So here we have this, we use the 2 proxies for lecture capture usage. The main one is the video viewed. It is a percentage of the lecture, videos viewed by students, which is calculated as the view duration divided by capture duration, because students, when they watch this lecture video, they do not necessarily watch this 100%. They might just stop it somewhere and then left. An alternative proxy is the video views, which is the number of the times students have viewed videos. The data showed some students basically they keep viewing the videos again and again. So basically, we use these proxies to measure the lecture capture usage, and then others quite standard of the final grade is used to measure the academic performance. And then for the polling participation, so this polling participation, which is calculated as the total responses by students divided by total poll questions. This is the proxy for this in-class participation. And we'll also control for the other variables, including the student age, gender, the fee status, or whether they're home student or EU student or overseas student, and also control for tutorial attendance, slide viewed. This is also quite standard. So let's look at our preliminary results. So the preliminary results are summarized in 4 tables. The first table shows the impact of the lecture capture on attendance. As you can see here, we do find the percentage of the video viewed as the main proxy for this lecture capture usage indeed has a negative, statistically significant negative effect on attendance. This is robust to different set of controls. The next table summarizes the effect of attendance on performance. And as you can see from this table, it shows that the lecture attendance had a statistically positively significant effect on final grade. Again, it is robust to different set of controls. In order to investigate the role of in-class participation, so we run this, we rerun this set of regressions with this polling participation included, and the results are presented in the next table. And it's very interesting to note that after we control for polling participation, the effect of attendance, as shown in this first row, becoming significant. On the other hand, polling participation shows a consistently statistically significant positive effect on final grade. So it seems this results suggest that the in-class participation, of course, conditional on attendance, is essential, and the passive attendance actually is not really helpful. It is also worthwhile to note that the tutorial attendance also plays a very important role. As you can see, it has a statistically significant positive effect on final grade. Also, the magnitude of coefficient is relatively large. To test whether our results are sensitive to the measurement of lecture capture or not, we rerun the regression but use a different proxy for lecture capture usage, and then these results are presented in table 4. As you can see, the main conclusions still hold. We get similar results as in table 3. Of course, this might be on based on some endogeneity issue for further this investigation. For example, here attendance might be correlated with ability. For example, students who choose not to attend live lectures because they are already struggling with their studies. Similarly, this polling participation might be also related to ability. For example, more capable students, they tend to be more active and responsive in class. Finally, the attendance might affect this lecture recording view. So these are the econometrics, this issue we are still working on. That's why we say the current results are preliminary results. To conclude, in this study, the preliminary results suggest that the lecture recording view has a negative effect on attendance, and in-class participation conditional attendance is essential. Passive attendance does not help. Also, we find very strong evidence that the tutorial attendance is important for better performance, but at this stage, we need to interpret the results with caution. For example, this endogeneity problem needs to be addressed. Then what's the implication for the ongoing discussion of this synchronous online teaching in the post-COVID-19 world? The results seem to suggest that the online engagement in class, conditional on attendance, is the key. Simply show up without engaging class is not helpful. And also this small tutorial group teaching is important. Hopefully I do not use too much of time, but thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm very happy to take them in the Q&A section, and you can also contact me by email. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Interesting set of papers there. Let's do some Q&A before we go to the breakout rooms. Let me put up the information on the conference itself real quick. And then going to the Q&A, let's go back to George's presentation. They were talking about transfer a bit, that the idea that students have trouble with, they can do well in one course, they have difficulty then using your own course. I was going to see if you might have had any further thoughts on that. I think you're just about wrapping up that point though.
I think actually one of my co-authors, Irene Foster, actually had a comment about this.
Oh yes, Irene, please go ahead.
Bill, we have been doing testing with the math assessment since about 2011 at GW. And initially we got a lot of pushback from the econ department asking why were we taking so much time and effort doing the math assessment, and what were we really seeing? Did it in fact, were we seeing that students who did poorly on the math assessment also did poorly in microeconomics? And later, after we started our class, was taking the class going to help them do well in micro. So, so we started testing that, and a couple of people also asked us, why not just use SAT math scores? So we also looked at that, and we did a study where we looked at both our math assessment scores as well as students' SAT math scores. And we looked at their performance on a final exam, which was comprehensive. And so we were able to see that we were trying to see the cutoffs. Where are the cutoffs clear? Where we can see if they got this score on the math assessment and we told them that they didn't know the stuff, that they were in fact likely to get a D or an F in the course. And where if they got an 80% or above, then we knew that they were going to be fine in micro. But there always was a group in the middle that was a fuzzy group, and where the fuzziness comes from is not whether they know the math or not, but how much work they're willing to do for the course. And so we use that as talking points when we talk to students. We tell some students that your score indicates that there's a high likelihood you're going to fail in this course. And so we urge you to take the 1001 course, which is the prep course for micro. And then there are people where the scores are in the middle, and we tell them, you could do well in this course. We recommend that you take the prep course, but if you decide to stay in micro, we suggest you begin the semester with a tutor so that you make sure that you don't fall behind in the course. So having the test and letting students know that information at the beginning of the semester is very helpful for both the faculty member as well as the student. I hope that answered the question.
You did. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks,
Another
Irene.
question that came up on your paper was, if you do poorly on that assessment, you might take that as a signal of poor performance in the course. And do you offer some sort of encouragement for people who do poorly on the assessment?
So we will kind of roll out the more, I would say, like a more applied version of these emails in the fall, for the fall semester. What we've done this term, which we haven't looked at the data as far as results, but we actually worked very careful with our Learning Strategies Center to formulate an email which didn't sound like a discouragement to participate in the course. So this has gone through multiple hands to be very, very careful with wording and to actually say, hey, it would be really, really beneficial for you to be in the supplemental course. But it didn't at the same time say you will fail if you don't hit that specific score on the MESA.
Okay.
So,
in fact, at GW, we've been so successful with the wording that now everybody wants to take the prep course and we don't want them in that class.
Yeah. Interesting. Also, a couple comments, quite a bit of discussion in the chat. I must admit, as a chair, it's interesting to watch the chat. Technology we really don't use in real live conferences is something we probably should to get all the comments and feedback. It seems to be there's a variety of ways you get students to take these assessments seriously. Could someone please briefly summarize that?
So how to make them take assessments seriously? Well, I mean, it's in a lot, it's a role of instructor, right? We specify that this is a low stakes assessment. You don't actually, it's required, but your grade will not depend on it. At the same time, where there's a bunch of internal mechanisms which formulation which encourage the student. We say, hey, it's really important for us to know, because it lets us help you when we know how well you're doing these assessments. We also can control because wonderful thing about online assessments. So both MESA and MESA Foundations and Intermediate, as a lot of our assessments we've created, they run on an online platform. So we actually know how much time they've spent, how much kind of effort was done. We can see them clicking, changing like answers, not specifically, but we know how many clicks they've even done around the assessments, things like that. And so we, even analyzing data, we actually can see those people who have spent less than 5 minutes and just clicked through the assessment. But I think as the human factor is important, we as educators have to be very, very clear why the students are taking these assessments. I think this is like the best benefit of saying, we don't know in reality. We'll be very honest, we know what your math scores from courses might be, but we don't know what actually your specific math skills, map to learning goals look like. This, it's really beneficial for us to know, because then we can offer you a battery of things that you could do or we could do for you to improve your performance. And I think so maybe this kind of level of honesty encourages them. And with end of term assessments, again, the same thing applies, but then there's kind of extra encouragement for us, again, for review sessions are formulated based on assessments, right? So low stakes assessment is at the end of the term, give us opportunity to give them some extra boost of explanations before the exams.
Okay, thank you. Finally, I did see in the chat earlier, perhaps you could put in the contact information again for people who are interested in trying this out. I recall that you're being very collaborative at the moment in getting other people to participate. I can imagine at institutions lower like Cornell, you probably get a more normal distribution for those results. So if you put that information out there, that'd be great.
I think it's Doug posted it already, and also the slides should be up there. So eventually.
Okay, all right. It's well back in the chat now, I think. So
yeah, I can retype it. I can repost it.
Okay, that'd be great. And then for Amanda and Eva, we are running a bit late, by the way. You've probably noticed. I think a very interesting discussion and so forth. For Amanda and Eva, you briefly mentioned procrastination online. Could you extrapolate a little bit on that?
So one of our co-authors class is more along the lines of one of the experiments that Amanda was describing, that they have deadlines toward the end of a period, not spaced evenly, because it's a lot of students who might not be your traditional in-class students. So our thought was, especially in that setting where students have one big deadline in a few weeks, that delivering these kind of not just the nudge, but in reality, our intervention was that self-commitment, right? That you to yourself promise, like, am I going to do this? Yes, I commit to doing this, and hold yourself accountable, that it will help them not push off these assignments and their work and thinking about the material until right up to the exam.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a question in the chat about sample size, but that was addressed a bit later in your paper. And can you talk a little bit more about the actual details of the intervention? I missed that a bit. I might have been multitasking here. It's a little bit more work chairing a session online, I found out, than in real life.
No, so we had over 700 at Notre Dame, about 300 at Florida Atlantic, and 150 at U of I.
Did you find differences between the institutions?
By the type, they were different types of classes, so yes.
Okay.
The effects were not driven by the face-to-face, but by the hybrid and online classes.
Okay, all right. Do you see, where do you see this work going in the future?
Well, we're definitely going to look at more of the gamification aspects of this platform, because we think it would be interesting to look at how that might motivate, or if you're not a leader, dismotivate students. And we're interested in if that varies by gender and other demographic characteristics.
Okay. All right. Other questions then for Amanda and Eva, perhaps? An awful lot going on in the chat. It's really cool to see that. I didn't see too many more there when I was scanning it earlier. Perhaps come back here in a moment. I know it takes a lot of chat. It's one of those adjustments I made last semester, like most of us, I think, that it takes a little while for people to chat things in. For Rebecca, my former colleague Liz mentioned that a lot of what you're doing wasn't what might actually be called a nudge. Might you have a few more thoughts on that, on your interventions, on why you call them a nudge, but perhaps they're a little bit more broad range than that?
Yes, I would agree that it probably doesn't fall into the classic definition of a nudge. We wanted to use that terminology because it is something that Phil Oriopoulos from the University of Toronto had called it. And since this was more of a replication study, we kept with that. But we recognize that, and we as co-authors all agree that perhaps nudge is not the correct term. So that's something we'll take into consideration as we prepare this manuscript. Thank you.
Sure. And then also in this literature, it talks a lot about time of study. I remember reading Oriopoulos' paper, and they didn't talk much about actually how to study. It's well known that you can use poor study methods and not do very well. How much did you actually look at different types of studying?
So what we looked at in the barriers to success intervention was we looked at how they, a little bit more on how they balanced their time between studying and not. We also gave, and I think this was a question too in the chat, the tips we provided in the text messages were general study tips. Things like maybe instead of trying to cram for the exam the day before, try and spread out your studying. Do smaller study sessions where maybe you focus for 20 minutes rather than trying to do 4 hours worth of studying. And so these were general study tips that came from a lot of different educational literature.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, it strikes me, this is a little bit similar to some of the mindset interventions by Greg Walton. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yes.
That, just another thought to take a look at in the future. They do interventions on entering students, for example, thinking about challenges you might face. And they've actually some very large effects. They've been published in Science and so forth. There's actually a website called Mindset Scholars, I believe, where they look at some of these interventions. So it's interesting how finally economists are looking a bit at other disciplines and the interventions they're doing. I think these are some, Mindset Scholars. I'll send you information on that.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's always nice when we can look to other fields to try and see if we can use that within economics.
Yes, and it's oftentimes used for student success offices on campuses, or that's where it's starting to come up. Finally, for Dudley, one question came up was binge watching versus spreading out your watching. And when people binge watch, I think it was Doug McKee said, they tend to do poorly, but they spread out their watching, they did, students did well. Might you have some data on that?
Actually, that's a very good question. I think I need to take a closer look at the data, whether there's a data on the timing of this watching the videos. But I would say in general, I mean, in literature, usually they will argue the relationship between this watching these videos. They might be substitute for lecture attendance. They might be complement to this actual lectures. I'm thinking, even though I don't know whether we have the data or not, but I'm thinking overall, if we plot the students' attendance against the for example, the number of times they viewed the lecture recording, probably if we find some positive correlation between these two, they might suggest that overall the students use them as a complement or something. Actually, I don't have a very concrete idea here, but I'm thinking overall, you see there's a two opposite these forces between these two variables.
Okay. Another comment came up besides comments on cat videos. There were many discussions on that. usually my cat visits my classes. Lives here with me, and she is actually in the far chair today. But anyway, besides cat videos, do you know if you had English language native speakers or not? You can imagine some difference there. People wanted to replay the videos was something that came up in the chat.
Yeah, here we control for this called fee status. So we differentiate between home students. The home student basically is the UK students, and then EU students and the international students. They might not really is a native speaker or not, but to some extent, they indeed captured some this English ability. Yeah.
Thank you. A quick comment too, there's actually technology out there that captures what students are doing click by click, view by view. It's called XAPI. And you can actually get data on how long they watch the videos or do they do something else. And there's a competing technology, I'm blanking on the name at the moment. Vendors might or might not incorporate that. And of course, we don't have much choice in what vendors our campuses use. But there's more and more information on what students are doing online, including when they're watching videos. Penn State uses technology called Kaltura, and it can capture that information, I believe. So for many of us thinking about these studies, it's worth looking at on exactly what can be captured. It might be checked to do that with the vendor then. Why don't we move to the breakout rooms now, being a bit cognizant of our time. Again, great comments in the videos then. So I think Mandy will put us then in the breakout rooms. Did want to thank everyone for attendance. Great session, great conference. Again, really want to thank the organizers for actually doing this. I guess. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, all.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Bill.